Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LCS week number 4 overview, analysis, and of course at the end, my updated power rankings. The LCS has been pretty wild this year. I think the middle cluster of teams in this league are so similar, and it's always so interesting to see who comes out on top and who plays well in each individual week, because there really hasn't been a ton of consistency over the course of this split. Teams that we expected to be really good, some of them have been good, but some of them have been awful, and some of them have just been average, and then other teams that we thought would be average are really good, and really bad, and there's just so much parity in this league that it's honestly pretty fun to go game by game and talk about everything. So we're going to do that here in week number 4, of course. So let me know down in the comment section below what you guys thought of week number 4. Who do you think is doing well right now? Who do you think is not doing well right now? We're seeing a lot of roster changes, a lot of attempts to really capitalize on the fact that nobody is looking all that consistent at the moment and try to get to the top of the standings. And I think a lot of them are really interesting. We'll obviously talk about a ton of them in this video, but I'd love to know you guys' thoughts as well. Of course, if you are new here, what we do on this channel is we go game by game talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate across all 3 days. I will be giving a player of the game and a dud of the game, and then at the end of the week, I will be updating my power rankings as well as giving a player of the week and a dud of the week for the entirety of week number 4. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into day number 1. And we got to kick day 1 off with a matchup between Immortals and TSM. And TSM is going to be able to pick up the victory in this game number 1, and that's really, really good for them. Substitution to note, Insanity is back in. Talked about this last week. Ruby came in, finally got his visa, finally was able to get over here. But everybody kind of knew that Insanity was the better player anyways. He had certainly performed really well to start the split, and Ruby hadn't exactly shown great things when he was in the LEC, and so people were very hesitant, I think, to go all in on Ruby. TSM certainly wanted to give him a shot since they got him a visa. They brought him all the way to a new country, but it just didn't end up working out. Insanity was clearly the better, player, and so Ruby's benched after only 1 week. Insanity's back in here, and this is absolutely the right choice. Insanity already in 1 game looks so much better than Ruby. Now, I don't want to completely flame Ruby because it really isn't entirely his fault. Talked about it last week. He felt disconnected and disjointed from the rest of the team because he's had basically no time to practice or play with them. I don't want to put the expectations on him to be like, he should have been perfect in that 1 week to keep his job. I think that is an absurd thing to say. He really didn't have any time to integrate, but Insanity did have time to integrate, and this team wants to win right now, and so Insanity being in the lineup is definitely the better call. But it wasn't just Insanity that played well, although he did. Player of the game for me is going to go to Wild Turtle in the bot lane. Really good to see him continue to play well. He's one of those AD carries, and I think there's quite a few of these in North America in particular that I think is really going to play well when the rest of the team plays well, and he's going to look like a really good AD carry when he's given the opportunity. He's not necessarily somebody who's going to create something out of nothing, but if you give him something, he's going to do something with it. He's going to run with it, and I think that's a really good trait to have for a middle tier team, which I think TSM at the moment is. And Wild Turtle, I think, had a really, really good game here on the Jinx, but again, you could give player of the game to Insanity on the Yone as well. That was really fun. He's really been a spark plug for this team. In my opinion, he's probably been the best player on TSM in Summer Split so far, even though he's missed 3 games, and I really do think that says everything you need to know about his impact on the map. He's very aggressive, and he does play with this team very well. Like, he knows where exactly he needs to be. The rest of the team follows up on a lot of his aggressive plays really well, and I think just in general, those two, your carry duo, have been major positives. I think the rest of the team has been up and down, I'll say. Boogie and Chime are very good players. Chime in particular is somebody who I've vouched for a lot in the past. I've been very vocal about how I think Chime is a super underrated support at this level. Somebody who, if he played for, a better team and a better org, I think would get a lot more attention. He's really good at playing the map and playing for his jungle. More of a roam-oriented support, but can still play laning phase rather well, and I think he did in this one on the Lulu. I talked a bit in my LCK video yesterday about how I think that enchanters are kind of underrated in terms of the meta right now because everybody wants to play engagers, but Lulu's still really good. Boogie was good on the Nautilus, creating. He was really good pairing up with Insanity. This is what I was trying to say. Haunter's been a little questionable over the start of this split, has had a couple of pretty bad games, but has also had a couple of pretty solid games, and I think Haunter's going to solidify as the split goes on. Overall, TSM is a team that I think is going to kind of go with the flow. I think they're going to be able to beat some of the worst teams in the league like Immortals, and I think they're going to look good doing it. And then for Immortals on the other side, this is the worst team in the LCS. Talked about this a bit last week. They just don't really have a ton of win win conditions right now, and that was very clear in this game where they just got completely outclassed. Like, I know it was a 40-minute game, but it really wasn't all that close. There were moments and players on Immortals that kept it interesting, but like for the most part, as a unit, they're just not very good. Dead of the game for me is going to go to Solo in the top lane. I don't think he hit a single Poppy ultimate this game. If he did, I must have missed it. I think he hit one or something like that, but missed the other 7 or 8, and wasn't really involved in any sort of positive plays. He was playing so safe and so passive that he gave up so much pressure in basically every single team fight. This team is relying on someone like Poppy to be a major, not initiator, but peeler for this team, to kind of create for the rest of the team. You're playing a Protect the Kog'Maw comp. You need the Poppy to step up, and Solo was pretty bad. Kenvi really lost pressure early on to the Nautilus. He wasn't atrocious, and honestly, he's been really bad this split, so this game in particular certainly does not stand out, but he wasn't great either. And then Treats made a lot of just really bad decisions in this game. Not really sure what the macro was from him. I'm not sure if he's making the calls or if somebody else is making the calls. But a lot of times where he just kind of abandons his AD carry to die as Braum, which is very, very weird. Like, this is a Protect the Kog'Maw comp. Your only goal is to make sure that Tactical can deal damage. And it just felt like the ancillary pieces, the tanks on this team, forgot that goal multiple times throughout the game, which is frustrating. But Tactical and Balulu were good, just not good enough. Tactical in particular, I thought played well. But this Immortals team just isn't very good. I don't expect them to win a lot of games down the stretch. It feels like this team is never going to get good performances out of more than, 1 or 2 out of the 5 players in any particular game. Tactical's actually been pretty good this split, and I like Balulu. I think that there's some interesting stuff there, but, I mean, top side of this map is really a disaster for them, and Treats has been very inconsistent, and so not really a big fan of what Immortals is doing, and for TSM, this is a nice win. This team has looked way better with Insanity in. They were a top 5-ish team with Insanity in at the beginning of the split. They could absolutely get back there, and I think a win over Immortals is a really nice way to start the week. And then moving on to our second game of day number 1 here, and it's an interesting matchup between two teams that haven't looked nearly as good as maybe a lot of people thought they would. We had 100 Thieves taking on FlyQuest, and 100 Thieves is going to be able to pick up the win here. FlyQuest looked really good last week with a 3-0 week after starting 0-6, but all of their problems are not gone. They are not just done. This team continues to make me question what exactly the end result is going to be for them, because there's so much talent on this team, but it's really not coming through in almost any of these games at the current moment. But 100 Thieves did look really good in this game. They actually did basically everything that they were supposed to. Really good early game laning phase from a lot of these players, and they team fought really well. They kept control of the game, and they closed it out relatively efficiently. So honestly, impressive game from a 100 Thieves team that honestly has really struggled up until this point, this split. I mean, struggled in the sense of they're 500 and they really didn't expect to be. They're more in this cluster in, like this group of middle tier teams than I think they kind of expected themselves to be. And I think hopefully they're going to get better. Hopefully this team now with Quid, like integrated a little bit better, is going to be a little bit higher upside, but right now, this was a really good start of that, I would say. Player of the game for me is going to go to Doublelift in the bot lane on the Varus. Really good game from him. His ability to consistently deal damage, I think, has been very impressive over the course of this year. We really weren't sure what we were going to get out of Doublelift in terms of, him coming back to pro and him, kind of being a big focal point for this team, but this team has absolutely decided to play around him. For whatever reason, he's been a big, resource getter for 100 Thieves, and honestly, he's done relatively well with those resources. He's certainly been better than I expected. He's been one of the better ADCs in North America this year, and I think this was a good example of that. He was better than Prince. Prince, had some good moments, was able to deal some damage on the Aphelios, and we'll get to him, but he also made some major mistakes, and I don't think Doublelift made any major mistakes this game. He played off the rest of his team very well, and was honestly just very consistent. The other player to shout out, Quid, in the mid lane, and this is the big kind of like tipping factor, I would say, for 100 Thieves. If Quid is going to play well, if Quid is going to win lane, and, really push the team forward, I think this team is going to be good. I think they're going to be fine. They're going to be a top 4 or 5-ish team in the LCS, as they should be, but if Quid isn't that, which he hasn't been super consistently, then they're probably not going to be that. So Quid having a good game here, I think, is very, very important. Winning lane on Azir into Tristana is not easy. That is a very difficult matchup for the Azir, and so credit to Quid. He was really good in lane. He was really good moving around the map. Was just a very solid player overall. Everybody else played well in that same vein. Closer created a lot of action. Again, went bot lane a lot, but that's really been 100 Thieves' strategy in the early game, and that's what's given them the most amount of success over the past year. Busio was really good. good on the Rel, really like him on these more engage-oriented supports. Was never a big fan of him on the Enchanters, I just didn't think it was necessarily his playstyle. The Rakan last split was certainly something that every team had to watch out for, but I think the Rel kind of falls into a similar category, and then Someday was more than fine on the Malphite. That final ultimate onto Prince was absolutely massive, and so 100 Thieves in general, just across the board, looking good in this one. Really liked specifically, though, Someday, Quid, and Doublelift in terms of the output. And then for FlyQuest on the other side, all of this team's problems are not solved. It is not just gone after the 3-0 week. They started 0-6 for a reason, and honestly, a lot of the things that they really struggled with are absolutely still here. And last week, they had a relatively easy schedule, so kind of getting back into the swing of playing relatively good teams is certainly, something to keep in mind here. Dud of the game is going to go to Vikla. He has just completely collapsed. I have nothing else to say. I defended him a lot in spring, and I will absolutely stand by that. I think his spring split was significantly better than people give it credit for. I think he was, a really good player, 75 to 80% of the time. Like, yes, there was like 20 to 25% of the time where he would make some major mistakes and not be all that good, but comparatively to a lot of the other mid laners in North America in particular, there just weren't a lot of other mids that were good 80% of the time, right? And I think Vikla's, good games were better than a lot of other players' good games, but I cannot defend Summer. Like, Summer has been a disaster. He has been bad. There really is no ambiguity to that. He's been one of the worst players in the LCS, and I can't explain to you why. It's not the same as Spring. It's not just him being over-aggressive and sometimes getting punished for it on a team that is known for being maybe a little bit slower or a little bit more bot lane focused. It's him just not winning lane in matchups that, in Tristana into Azir. Like, how do you lose lane Tristana into Azir? Like, that shouldn't be possible. He's just not playing well right now, and I don't really know what's going on, but it's gotta fix because he's an integral part to what this team wants to do. The rest of this team isn't particularly playing well. Impact had a rather rough game. Someday was significantly better than him in this one, certainly impact-wise. Spico was fine on the Maokai, didn't really make any major errors. Prince and Vulcan had good moments. Vulcan in particular, I think, had some good engages, and Prince was dealing damage, but Prince not flashing the Malphite ult at the end of the game, like, that's a game-losing mistake. They were already super far behind, and it would have been difficult, but still, you gotta be able to make that play. Funny that he would do that opposite of Doublelift. Kind of a funny little apropos moment there, but FlyQuest is certainly not fixed. I know 100 Thieves is a relatively good team, but FlyQuest needs to be able to step it up. This is a team that they should be able to beat, and they just don't look very good right now. And then for 100 Thieves on the other side, really nice win to get here, but FlyQuest is in complete turmoil. I need to see this team do it significantly more consistently against other teams that are in this, cluster of middle, groups right now. I'd love to see them beat a Team Liquid. I'd love to see them beat a TSM that we just saw. These are the teams that I think I really want to see them go up against and actually be able to deal with. And right now, it's a good win and it's a good start over FlyQuest, but I need to see more. And then moving on to game number 3 here, we had a battle between two teams that are above 500. Maybe surprisingly, we had Dignitas taking on Evil Geniuses. And EG is going to be able to pick up the win here, and they absolutely should. They're one of the best teams in the entire league right now. They've looked incredibly consistent over the beginning part of the split, and even though Dig, I think, has looked actually pretty good and certainly better than I expected, they're kind of a middle-tier team. They're in that cluster that I just talked about, and Evil Geniuses does feel like they're a team that is kind of above that at the current moment, and so them being able to pick up the win, it's expected, but it's still a really good sign for them. Overall, player of the game for me is going to go to Unforgiven in the bot lane on the Xayah. I really like him on champions like Xayah that can self-peel and be aggressive. Like, they can do kind of everything that you need them to do. Xayah is really good in the early game, especially compared to a lot of the ADCs that we've seen recently in the meta. Now, obviously, Dignitas went for a little bit of a different draft here, a draft I actually really like. In concept, I really like Tristana and Ziggs as your carry duo with something like a Poppy or an enabler in the jungle. I think that's a really good idea in the current meta. I think the current patch definitely suits a draft like that, but Xayah just kind of gets out of this all really, really easily. The Malphite can't engage onto her relatively easily at all because of the ultimate, and she can still step up and play really aggro into things like the Ziggs and the Tristana, and they don't really have a lot of avenues to be able to deal with that if she's super far ahead, and so Unforgiven playing it really well. He's been really good. I would say pretty good. I shouldn't say really good. Pretty good over the start of the split. There have been some awkward moments, I would say. I don't think he's been as dominant as some people would lead you to believe. He's not been the #1 ADC in the region, in my opinion. He's just been a really good top 3, top 4 ADC in the LCS so far this split. I think this team has not really played through him a ton, but he has been really good on weak side and a very consistent early and mid-game laner, and so good stuff from Unforgiven, another good performance from him, and then Ayla I thought also was phenomenal. The dude could not mess up a flank on this Rel, basically throughout the entire game. He would often fall so that the rest of the team could survive, but he played a really good game, and he's having a really good split. I'm really happy to see Ayla bounce back. A lot of the conversation around him last split really was unfair, and we talked about it a ton on this channel, but being thrust into a team that had already developed its own little sense of chemistry and its own kind of synergy, and then be expected to kind of take over a big, like, shot calling vocal role just midway through the split was always going to be a very tough task for him. And I think getting him into a room where, you know, some of that pressure is alleviated. EG didn't have as high of expectations. This team had a lot more time to get ready together and to form their own level of synergy. He wasn't entering a pre-existing core. I think a lot of that has helped him out so much. So Unforgiven and Ayla both looking really good. And then Armeo, I would also say, is looking fantastic on the Ivern, just significantly, you know, better pathing than everybody else in the league, and it really is impressive. Pathing is so important. I talk about it a ton in the LCK and the LPL about how really good pathers are just so consistently able to generate early leads. Look at, you know, someone like Kanavi, right, who's just like the best in the world. Armeo is kind of that for the LCS, if you will, where he's just kind of got better pathing, I think, than everybody else, and he's always ahead in the early game. Santorin had a couple of good moments, but he also had a couple of really bad moments, which we'll talk about. But Armeo, Unforgiven, Ayla, they looked good. Revenge was fine on the Rumble, not really all that relevant. Jojo was good on the Jace. All he needed to do was kind of neutralize the Tristana, and I think he did that relatively well. Overall, EG looked good in this game, but again, it's not particularly surprising. And then for Dignitas on the other side, losing to EG is certainly not the worst loss in the world. I think there were a couple of positive takeaways from this game. Santorin, I think, played most of the game relatively well. A couple of mistakes coming out from the Poppy towards the back half, but, you know, it's okay. You're going to be able to live with that. Santorin has been very inconsistent over the course of this split, so to see him actually have a really good game here, I think, is definitely good. Jensen was relatively fine on the Tristana, especially in the team fights. He was actually dealing damage, and that's more than I can say for a lot of other mid laners consistently in the LCS, so those are positives, but the rest of the team was just kind of meh to me. Done of the game is going to go to Diamond in the support position. I do think he gets a little bit more hate than maybe he deserves, because when you're a very aggressive support like Diamond is, somebody who is going to consistently try and make plays no matter the game situation, you're going to look a little bit worse when your team isn't as talented around you, but you got to be able to figure out when to go in and when not to go in. That has to be part of the thought process, and it doesn't feel like Diamond has necessarily clicked in that same vein, especially with the rest of this team yet. Nobody on this team is very aggressive. Santorin and Jensen are probably the most passive jungle mid duo in the entire league. Tomo has his moments, but Diamond is like kind of an outlier on this team in terms of wanting to go in and wanting to play aggro, and I just don't think it really fits all that well with what Dignitas wants to do. I still think Diamond could be a good player at the LCS level, but I really don't think it's going to be with this collection of players. I think this game kind of summarizes what he does in the support position, which is just kind of go in, and hopefully the rest of the team follows up. But Dignitas is all right. They're certainly not a problem team. They're going to be relatively fine. They're at 500 now after this loss, and I think that's going to be a place where they stay for most of the split. They're going to be able to beat the worst teams in the entire league, but, you know, going up against a team like EG, I think is just a little bit out of their wheelhouse. And then for Evil Geniuses on the other side, they're really, really good. They are one of the best teams in the league. They moved to 8-2. Really, really good start to the split. Now, are they going to be able to keep this kind of momentum up for the entire year? You hope so. You hope that this can be a Worlds team coming out of North America, and I think especially if Unforgiven and Ayla continue to step up, that will be the case, because Jojo, Armeo have been very good. Revenge is solid on the top side. EG just looks good, and I think a lot of people are excited to see that for these players in particular. And then moving on to our fourth game of day one, and it is a battle between the two top teams in my power rankings heading into the week. We had Golden Guardians taking on Cloud9, and Golden Guardians is able to pick up a very big win here. This is a nice one for GG. Being able to take down C9, I think, is definitely an impressive win. C9 has looked very good over the start of this split. Certainly not unflappable. They've looked a little bit inconsistent in terms of actually being able to feel locked in and mentally prepared on every single game, but they should have been for a game against Golden Guardians, the team that they just met in the finals and obviously went to MSI. This is one of those games that you have to circle on the calendar, and it felt like C9 just was not ready. Their game plan was significantly too slow, and honestly, Golden Guardians just outplayed them a lot in this one, and it's really, really good to see. Really happy for this team, really happy for this org. Player of the game for me is going to go to River in the jungle. This was an absolute no-brainer for me. River absolutely destroyed C9 in this game. He pulled out the Jarvan. This is a pick that we've seen from him very consistently, a very big pick. I think for a lot of different junglers around the world, a lot of different junglers have a ton of practice on Jarvan, and he just creates this game state that I think can be super positive. He's like Vi, but I think a little bit more consistent in my eyes. Maybe not as strong on the current patch, but still someone that I think, you know, kit-wise is very, very good. And River, I think, executed that kit incredibly well. When you look at the team comp for C9, you see a Renekton, you see a Draven, you see even a Viego Annie, right? Like, these are things that can move around the map, try to create early pressure, and try to snowball the game out of control. Well, if you pick the Jarvan, now all of a sudden you have a ton of gank pressure, and you have a ton of ability to kind of influence the map before, C9 and Viego have the ability to do the same. So, massive stuff coming in from River. He played it really well. His pathing was great, and his ability to affect every single lane was really, really big for the rest of Golden Guardian. So, River, easy choice for player of the game, but the rest of this team was also phenomenal. I have to keep shouting out Huhi because he keeps being this massive positive presence for Golden Guardians. You notice him so much in every single game, no matter basically who he's playing. Wow, I didn't even realize that, and pun certainly not intended. But the Braum in this one was phenomenal. I mean, there are quite a few good Braum players. Mickey X definitely comes to mind in terms of 2023, but Huhi was really, really good on this one. Massive bot lane gap in terms of Golden Guardians, and a lot of that, in my opinion, was in favor of the Braum, and so really good stuff coming out from Golden Guardians and from Huhi. Stixxay was still really good on the Aphelios, so I don't want to take that away from him. Gory was good, Licorice was good, but this was River really taking over the game, and then Huhi, I think, just mechanically playing incredibly well on that champion, creating and defending at a very high level. So good stuff for Golden Guardians. Again, Huki's like a sneaky MVP candidate, and River's been very good. This team is just in general very good. And then for Cloud9 on the other side, unfortunate loss here. This is, and most people, I think almost everybody's #1 team in the LCS. They've certainly looked the most dominant over the beginning part of the split, but they keep dropping games when they're really not supposed to, and Golden Guardians is one of those games that you really can't excuse as much. They're too equal in terms of, kind of expectation and where teams are supposed to be, that C9 losing is actually kind of concerning in this instance. I'm not going to overreact. Obviously, we'll see what happens with them over the rest of the week, but this game wasn't particularly good. Dud of the game was actually kind of hard, because really, honestly, everybody lost. Like, you could give it to quite a few players on the team. I'm going to give it to Sven on the Soraka, if only just because it felt like the Soraka was completely useless this game, but you could make the same argument for Fudge on the Renekton. Hell, you could make the same argument for Blabber on the Viego, all of which were really, really not all that good in this game. At the very least, Eminus was trying to make plays. They often weren't working, but he was at least going out there and trying to do something. Berserker just couldn't get a cash out onto Draven, but I'm going to give it to Sven because I noticed him by far the least. He had such an impact on a lot of the skirmishes in the bot half, and that Soraka really did nothing the entire game. There was no setup for the Draven. There was no team fight presence. There was just no impact on the game overall, and sometimes that pick is going to be relatively useless, but that's kind of the risk you take when you pick it, and Sven, I don't think, paid off that risk all that well. And then, like I said, Fudge and Blabber were also really bad in this game. The Renekton fell behind in the early game, which is bad. That's really not good going into something like Cassante, and Blabber just got jungled circles around on this Viego. This is something that has happened before in the LCS. It doesn't happen ridiculously consistently, but when Blabber does lose, it's usually just because he loses tempo in the early game, and this is kind of what happened here. He wasn't abysmal, he wasn't giving over gold or anything like that, but he allowed River to basically do everything that he wanted, and it kind of destroyed C9's game plan in a nutshell. So overall, bad game for C9. There really is nothing else to say. You gotta see them turn this around. They've got 2 more games to prove that this is a little bit of an outlier, but not a great look for them. And then for Golden Guardians, this is a really good look for them. Being able to beat the #1 team as the #2 team has always got to feel really good, and doing it in such dominant fashion, I think, is also very good. River stepping up and playing really well, and Huhi continuing to look like one of the best players in the entire league, I think definitely helps, but it's the whole team. Golden Guardians is legit. Spring Split was not a fluke, and this team is very good. And then moving on to our 5th and final game of day #1 here, and it was a little bit of an upset as we saw NRG taking on Team Liquid. And NRG was able to pick up the win. Really nice stuff coming out from them here. This is a team that honestly had a lot of high expectations going into the split. But unfortunately for them, a lot of those expectations have just not been able to be met over the beginning part of the split at the very least. I think the new org coming in, keeping a lot of players from a CLG team that was relatively competitive, and a player like FBI coming in, who I think, at least I have a lot of confidence in as a player, really sparked a lot of interest in me for what this team would be able to do in the middle of the standings. But things just haven't worked out as planned, but this is a really nice win for them against a Team Liquid team that is kind of good. There were definitely moments in this game where they were really good, the early game especially, but in Team Liquid fashion, they ended up throwing the late game and not being able to close out the game, and that's just kind of how it works. But credit to NRG for being able to stay in it. This is not the first game of the year that they've won basically just by not giving up, and I think that's a really good quality. Player of the game for me is going to go to Contracts in the jungle. He's very quietly been phenomenal for this NRG team. I think you can attribute almost every single one of their wins to Contracts. He really has been that good. Both junglers, I think, played really well in this game. We'll talk about Pioshik in a bit, but Contracts was really good in terms of the pathing, not giving up too much in the early game. A couple of mistakes made by his laners actually did give some gold over to Team Liquid, but he was really good in the team fights towards the back half. Poppy is one of those champions that can really make a massive impact if you're really good on her, especially into Fiora and Akali and Rakan. You know, a lot of these, even Sejuani, right? A lot of these champions that you can really disable a lot easier than a lot of other champions have the opportunity to, and I think Contracts did a really good job of it. He's really turned into one of the more interesting junglers in the entire league. I've always been a little bit lower on Contracts than maybe public opinion. I know in the past couple of years on CLG, he's really rehabilitated his reputation. He started to do that on 100 Thieves and on Evil Geniuses, but I think it's really kind of culminated on this org, and I really do think that this might be the single best split that he's had on CLG or Energy or on this roster, right? And I think it's a really, really good sign. Hopefully he can keep it up. But the rest of the team was good too. FBI was fantastic on the Jinx. He's been a little bit shaky towards the start of this split, more shaky than I would have anticipated, but he's a player that I expect to be able to figure it out. He's been incredibly consistent over the course of his career, never really a massive negative for any team that he's ever played for, and so would really expect him to be able to become, one of the more, I guess, good AD carries in the league. I don't know if he'll ever get back to being one of the great ones, but certainly one that you're going to be happy to have on the team. Ignar was fine in this game on the Milio, and I think that's a good thing. Ignar's been a little bit of an issue over the beginning part of the split, so to see him play relatively well, I think is good. Palafox was good. Dokla was fine, although he got absolutely blasted in lane. A lot of good for Energy, and most of it came in the late game, and I think that's a good sign. Hopefully they're going to be able to hang on to that kind of identity. And then for Liquid on the other side, again, similar story to almost every single thing that has happened to Team Liquid over the course of this split. Really good early game. They're just not able to sustain it really at all. Summon and Pioshik in particular actually did have a really good game here, and that is something that usually means TL wins. Like if Summon and Pioshik play well, usually that means Team Liquid is basically guaranteed to win because Yeon and Core are relatively consistent, and they weren't bad in this game either. Yeon in particular I think is a really good player and a really good team fighter, but unfortunately Harry in the mid lane became a little bit of a weakness in this one, and I understand that a lot of people love to jump to conclusions, especially in the LCS. They love to be like big doomer, but Harry really hasn't been all that bad this split. He really hasn't been great either. I'm certainly not trying to say that he's been one of the best mids or anything like that, but I saw a lot of people saying that it's absurd that he has a spot in the LCS, and obviously that is just not like an accurate representation of what Harry has been able to do. He had a miserable game here, and I'm not going to try to defend that. This Akali game was really bad. I'm not going to say he solo lost it, because no one really solo loses you games at this level, but Harry was close. It was pretty damn close. He was really not good for this Team Liquid team, but, I have faith in him as a player to be able to figure it out. Unfortunately, he's going to have to figure it out in the NACL, because, as I'm sure you know, later this week, he would be replaced by APA, and as much as I do like Harry, I think APA is an even better player for those of you who follow my NACL content, so credit to Harry. I think he's a good player, and he's certainly going to rebound, and I expect to see him in the LCS again at some point in his career, but I think it's the right move to be able to move on from him. This was a pretty bad game, but Pioshik and Summit were actually really good. Pioshik's pathing in the early game was fantastic. His team fighting was really good. Yeon, very similar story. I think those were the two standouts. Summit had a really good laning phase on the Fiora. It just wasn't enough to get them to win. It's going to happen sometimes, but this team is now sitting at 500. We've kind of been talking about them as if they're an upper echelon team for most of the split. That's certainly not a guaranteed thing for Team Liquid. Hopefully they can continue to improve and kind of shore up some of their weaknesses, but it's honestly feeling a lot more like spring now than it did a couple of weeks ago. And then for Energy, nice win. Not going to completely throw out all my analysis on this team. If the bot lane can get more consistent and if the top side can be relatively good, if Contracts continues to have as good of a split as he's having, Energy can still be a really competitive team. I think basically number 4 to number 9 in the standings right now is all super similar in terms of the LCS, and I think Energy is definitely amongst that group. So hopefully they can continue this, because I think the league's going to be better if this team is fun to watch. And then we get to move on to day number 2 now in week number 4 of the LCS, and we kicked off day 2 with a rematch of the semifinals in spring, if you can believe that. FlyQuest taking on Golden Guardians, and Golden Guardians is going to pick up their second win of the week. Good stuff coming in from them. FlyQuest continues to struggle a lot. Yes, it's against relatively good teams this week. 100 Thieves and Golden Guardians are both certainly talented teams, and I think GG in particular was definitely the favorite going into this for me and for a lot of other people, but this was a really good game from them. And honestly, they continue to prove that they deserve to be mentioned in the conversation as one of the best teams, if not the best team in North America at the current moment. They're really, really fun to watch. They're pretty consistent. Obviously, you hope that they can continue to be consistent, but they've been consistent up until this point, and they're talented. They've got a lot of players that have really unlocked the best versions of themselves, and that's the recipe for a team that could very well be a contender to win the LCS this split. So Let's talk about it. Player of the game for me was really tough because two players in particular played phenomenal in this one. I'm going to go ahead and give it to Stixay in the bot lane. He's just so aggro. He's playing with so much confidence right now that it's so fun to watch. He's going to make some mistakes. Sometimes he's going to be a little bit too far forward, but for the most part, you put him on something like a Felios that can buy Gale Force and go in and deal a lot of damage and really take over games in team fights, and he is going to take over the game in a team fight, you know? He's super fun to watch, one of the more fun to watch players in the entire league, and you want to talk about a complete, like, it's weird to say breakout candidate because Stixay's been so good in the past, but like a re-breakout candidate, a comeback player, however you want to phrase it, like, I don't know if we've ever seen one as successful as Stixay here. Not that he was awful in previous years, but rather just going from perception levels of like, oh, this guy's like a borderline LCS player, probably a top-tier NACL bot laner, to like, oh my god, he's like one of the best AD carries in the West, and it's not really all that close, and he's really dominating people on it. So really happy to see Stixay like continue to step up his game and continue to genuinely be one of the best AD carries in the West, full stop. Like maybe the best in North America, maybe other than Berserker. Like it's pretty damn close, and he's really, really damn good. Outside of that, Huhi continues to be awesome. Love watching him play the Nautilus. The setups for a lot of what Stixay was doing were really good, but the other player that I wanted to shout out for almost player of the game was Gory in the mid lane, who played phenomenal on the Sylas. Really fun to see a good Sylas game in particular because that champion can be very explosive, and Gory, I think, played it at a very high level. The trades that he was taking with Vikla in lane were so positive for him that he basically won lane by 5 minutes, like no matter what happened the rest of the game, right? Like he was just so up ahead in terms of pressure throughout the entire map, and he was able to translate that to moving around with River on this Kindred to try to skirmish in the early game, try to create pressure, especially towards the bot side, and I really think that was another big reason why Stixay was able to get really fed in this game. And so Gory, Stixay, Huhi playing well. River also playing well. Licorice was okay. Impact was really good on the other side of the map, and so Licorice didn't have as much of a chance to shine as maybe the rest of the team, but he had a couple really good moments on the Cassante in team fights, but really, it's just a complete game from Golden Guardians. Stixay, Gory in particular looking awesome. Huhi continues to be amazing, an MVP candidate, and River has been great as well, so Golden Guardians looking good. And then for FlyQuest on the other side, again, like, I don't know what to tell you, man. This team is just not working. These players kind of suck right now, and it's individual, right? It's like their hands are not working. It's not just their brains. Their brains aren't working either, but that I would understand a little bit more in terms of, oh, I'm just a little bit mental boomed. I'm just not in a great, mental state right now. But it's the mechanics that really are the problem for FlyQuest. It's losing in lane super consistently. That's been the problem for Vikla, who got absolutely destroyed by Gory. He was almost my dud of the game here. I'm going to give it to Vulcan on the Milio because his laning phase was absolutely atrocious. You're playing Xayah into a Felios. You simply have to be able to generate some sort of lead in the early game, and Vulcan absolutely did not do that. Prince was dealing a lot of damage this game, but man, he was consistently a target, and he certainly didn't do enough to be able to get himself out of those situations. The only player that I think you can look at as any sort of positive on this team this game was Impact in the top lane, who actually was pretty good on the Renekton, but like, what are you going to do on Renekton? Like, there's only so much you can do in this game, and so for Fly, 3-8, like, this is a disaster. Vikla is, like, one of the worst players in the LCS right now. Spica has not had a good jungle performance all split long. Prince and Vulcan are okay. Prince still has the mechanics. He's the one player that I don't think has dropped the mechanics, but his brain has completely shut off, and he's almost always out of position, and then Vulcan's just not been very good. Like, I don't know what to say about FlyQuest. This team isn't very good. I'm very close to just giving up on them entirely and just saying it's a dead split. Now, obviously, it's so hard to do that with the amount of talent that they have on this team, but they could very well be like a bottom 2 team and not even make playoffs in the first place. And then for Golden Guardians, like, this is a top 2 team, maybe a top 1 team at the current moment with their win over Cloud9. They're crazy consistent. I just want to see them be able to level up and do this every single week. They usually drop games to some random teams, and obviously I'm really hoping they don't do that. They can be relatively streaky, and they are on a good win streak right now, but they've got to be able to sustain it. If they can basically like win out, they can win like 12, 13 games this split, I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable with Golden Guardians moving into the playoffs. And then moving on to our second game of day number 2 here, and it was a matchup between Cloud9 and Dignitas. A couple of former teammates facing off against each other here, and Cloud9 is going to be able to take this one. Not particularly surprising. Again, Dignitas is a good team, but they do kind of feel like the gatekeepers here in the LCS. They're going to beat the bad teams that are kind of struggling at the moment, and they're going to lose to the good teams that are actually really good, and Cloud9 is, you guessed it, really, really good. They're one of the best teams in the West, and I know that day number 1 happened, and it was a little up and down. There was a couple of positives, a couple of negatives, but Cloud9 is still Cloud9. Like, it's hard to lose faith in this team with how much they've been able to do over the past few months, and over the past, 10, 11 years, honestly. And so Cloud9 looking really good here. Player of the game for me is going to go to Eminus in the mid lane. He's very quietly been phenomenal this split. Like, I know Jojo Pune's getting a lot of attention, and rightfully so. He's been fantastic and probably the best player in the LCS up until this point, but Eminus has been right there with him as maybe like the second best mid laner easily in the league. Like, I think it really is those two, like Gory, and then a huge gap for anybody else in the entire LCS at the current moment. And, that just goes to show how good Eminus is. It feels like he really is unlocking the best versions of himself. We called him a very feast or famine player, up and down, can be pretty volatile, or at least that's what he was in spring. He's really not been volatile at all so far in summer. He's just been very good for this team. And another really good Tristana game here. Again, that champion is so strong. I know I talked about this in my other regions videos, but I know some people are kind of up and down on the Tristana pick. I think she's the single strongest mid laner in the game right now, and I think you should try and build a comp around her if you have the option to, and Cloud9 doing that here I think was definitely the right choice. Berserker and Sven going for Varus Heimerdinger is certainly interesting. They played a little bit better than what they did on day number 1, but I'm still a little bit concerned about this bot lane. They're certainly not playing at the level that they were playing at in spring or in last year, and so definitely something to keep in mind there. But Blabber, much better on the Maokai. Fudge was questionable on the Renekton, but overall still a good game overall for C9. The jungle mid duo was more than enough to push them forward and kind of push them across the finish line, and hopefully they're going to be able to keep up that kind of momentum for the rest of this split. And then for Dignitas on the other side, it's really just exactly what we've already talked about. This is a good team, not a great team, and so when they do go up against a great team, they are going to struggle, and they do have some weaknesses in terms of player and personnel, and unfortunately one of those is Diamond in the support position. I like Diamond a lot, and I'm going to die on the hill that I do think that he would be better with a different group of players. I think that, he maybe isn't like the best support in the entire world, but I think playing on this team absolutely is hurting him and certainly making him look a lot worse than what he actually is because of the way that the team plays as opposed to his playstyle as an individual player. But it's hard to say anything other than the fact that he's been the single worst support in the LCS so far this summer. He's really not been very good. He's going to get dead of the game again here. He's just consistently taken advantage of by enemy teams. He's really aggressive and he tries to push forward as much as possible, but that puts him in such bad predicaments because the rest of the team is almost never in a position to actually follow up on anything he's doing. The rel has not been good, and he clearly has lost a lot of his confidence. And so I think sometime back in the NACL hopefully will help him again, but this is probably going to end a lot of the, rumors and speculation of him getting another team, I would say next year, because, man, this is just, it's a brutal performance. And I feel really bad for him because I do think he could be a really good player in a good situation. I think this situation is basically tailor-made for him to fail in a way that he is failing right now. But the rest of the team wasn't perfect. Tomo has not been particularly good this split, certainly been a bottom 2-ish, maybe a little bit better, but around there, bottom 2-ish AD carry in the league. Jensen was fine on the LeBlanc, and he's been relatively fine. Rich was good on the Jax, and he's been good. Santorin, very up and down, not someone that I particularly trust at the current moment, but Dignitas is a good enough team to certainly be able to win some games. I just don't know how many games that is. They're currently sitting at 5 and 6, and again, this is just about where we expected them to be. They're better than they were in spring, and they absolutely should be, but they're still not going to be an elite team, and honestly, they were never projected to be an elite team. And so for Dignitas, losing to Cloud9, it's certainly not the worst thing in the world, but hopefully you can start to get a little bit more consistency when it comes to kind of the weak points of your roster, if you will. And then for Cloud9, this team is really good at the current moment. I don't want to overreact to the loss to Golden Guardians. Again, best of ones are just so hard to take stock in. A lot of people are overreacting to one game or 2 games or something like that. Best of ones are just so hard to get a good grasp on, and so I still trust Cloud9 a lot. I'm not going to completely throw out my opinion on this team because they lost to Golden Guardians. I still think they're very good. I do think the top is a little bit more contested right now than before, and I think Cloud9 definitely has more weaknesses than maybe I was giving them credit for in previous weeks, but this still is one of, if not the single team to beat in the LCS. And then moving on to our third game of day number 2 here, and it was a matchup between TSM and NRG, 2 former rivals in a past life, and now, 2 teams with 3-letter acronyms for their team name, and TSM is going to be the one coming out on top here. Another really good game for them. That's a 2-0 start to the week for them, and that actually moves them to 5 and 6 in terms of their record, which is really good, especially in comparison to, I think, a lot of what the expectations for this team were this split. I did not think they were going to be particularly good. It felt like a lot of the other teams in the LCS got better, and this team was just kind of there, right? I was interested in players like Insanity playing, but I didn't see a ton of upside for them, and they've clearly proven me wrong. They have actually been really competitive over the beginning part of the split, and honestly, it does remind me of them in spring. It really does, like where they are much better than I was giving them credit for at the beginning of the split in terms of talent level, and they just play really well as a cohesive unit. They're able to pick up wins against teams that aren't as distinct in terms of how they want to play the game, and I think that was absolutely the case here. So let's talk about it. Player of the game for me is going to go to Boogie in the jungle. Really good game from Boogie. This might actually be his single best game in the LCS up until this point. He was pretty good in spring, like certainly not dominant, but you know, he was good enough. They were able to win games with him. He certainly wasn't a hindrance. There were quite a few junglers that I talk about in terms of like, they're good and they're not going to hurt you, but they're really not going to carry you across the finish line. You know what I mean? There are quite a few junglers in the world that have kind of given that tag, and I think Boogie is certainly one of them here in the LCS that I think is good enough to be able to help you win games, but isn't really someone that's going to consistently be able to win against some of the better junglers in the league. But this was a really good performance against a jungler who is having a very good split in Contracts. Yes, Contracts is very feast or famine, and unfortunately, they got the famine in this game, which we will talk about, but Boogie still, I think, played phenomenally. He really put Contracts in a horrible position on that Maokai, and he was never really able to recover, so good stuff from Boogie. He was great early, and he was even better late game, just good overall. And then, of course, we got to talk about Insanity. You know, him coming into this team and really being such a positive factor, a force for them moving forward is so big because they needed pressure coming out of the mid lane. It feels like he has a significantly better connection and synergy with the rest of this team, specifically Boogie in the jungle, and it feels like they play off of each other incredibly well. Insanity's not afraid to go and try and skirmish. He's not afraid to kind of push the wave and kind of give up things in order to make sure that the rest of his team is in a good spot, and I do think that's a major positive for this mid lane, and he's really fit into this team incredibly well. He should be starting the rest of the split. I don't even think it's really all that much of a conversation anymore. Wild Turtle and Chime continue to be good, but Haunter had one of his better games all split long. I actually do like Haunter again. I know that he hasn't exactly been perfect across this split, but he has shown a couple of good things, more than I think people are giving him credit for him. I think this game in particular was actually really, really good from him on the Renekton. Obviously, leading the game in kills is always a good thing. It wasn't quite that dominant, but it still was really good. He got a lot of help from Boogie in the jungle, but that Renekton, really, really fun to watch. We were kind of talking about him as a potential, like, Cassante Malphite 2 trick in the first couple of weeks, but pulling out the Renekton, that's more than enough to be able to get you into that, like, yeah, I don't gotta worry about your champion pool kind of territory, and so good on Haunter and good on TSM for being able to pick up this win. They looked really good in this game, and I'm hoping they're able to keep it up, because honestly, this team's kind of fun to watch in its current iteration. And then for Energy on the other side, just unfortunate. Like, being able to take down, you know, one of the better teams in the entire league on the first day, and then just getting absolutely blasted by, you know, a team that I think a lot of people don't really have a lot of faith in on the second day. That's Energy. That's truly counter logic. This team has basically only beaten the best teams in the league, and they've consistently lost to the worst teams. And I imagine that that's going to continue. That just feels like the identity of this Energy team. There's always one in the LCS, and it feels like it's going to be them this split. Dud of the game, no-brainer going to Contracts. Miserable game from him on the Maokai, consistently trying to make plays, even though he's super far behind, and even though the plays are incredibly bad plays to make. And Boogie just punished them every single time. Contracts could not play the game today, and it was really unfortunate to watch. Obviously, you're never really hoping for a bad performance like this, but at least you got it out of your system, right? Like, at least hopefully this game can be like, okay, well, it didn't end up working out, but this was Contracts' MO for a long time, right? You know, losing in the early game and then just continuing to try and make the same plays that he would make if he were ahead, and not having the gold to be able to back it up, and that was unfortunately the case. He's still been good this split, but still going to be an up-and-down player. Certainly not going to get consistency out of him. FBI and Ignar just do not click as a bot lane duo. It's very frustrating to watch, because I do like FBI a lot as a player, but I am pretty out on Ignar. I don't think he's a particularly good support, and these two do not have any sort of synergy together, so hopefully it shouldn't matter all that much. FBI's talented enough to be able to win games on his own, but, you know, the bot lane's going to be a bit of a problem. Palafox and Dokla are fine. Dokla kind of got bodied in the matchup, but that's okay. It's Renekton and a Jace, not always going to be the easiest thing in the world, and so it's okay for Energy. I'm not going to overreact and sit here and be like, this team is awful. I was right to put them at number 9, but they're not an elite team. They might be able to beat some of the elite teams because they're weird, and that's just kind of how they work, but I don't expect this team to consistently be able to compete near the top of the standings. This does really feel like a bottom 3, you know, bottom 4, bottom 2-ish team as we kind of move along, and I don't really think that all that much changed this week, even with their big win earlier. And then for TSM, it is a nice win, and honestly, I do feel a lot more confident in this team after the first 2 games of the week. I really do hope they're going to be able to keep up this momentum, because, like I said before, this team actually is really fun to watch right now. And then moving on to our 4th game of day number 2 here, and it was a battle between 2 teams that won on day number 1. We had Evil Geniuses taking on 100 Thieves, and EG is able to pick up another win here to move to 9-2, and you know, that's really, really good. With Cloud9 losing on day number 1, you know, going into the final day of week number 4, they're going to be in sole possession of that first place crown, which is obviously super good. You love to see that for EG, and this team just continues to look fantastic, and it's really everybody on the team that is playing really well. There is no weak link at the current moment, in my opinion. Everything is just kind of rolling for this EG team, and you've got to be incredibly excited about that. One of the big, obviously, catalysts that has helped this team out a lot is the fact that you have the current probable MVP favorite on your team moving into the second half of the split in Jojo Pune in the mid lane. He's going to get another player of the game for me here on the Tristana. He plays Trist better than anybody else in North America. Like, I know I love the pick, and I really do think it should gain popularity, and especially love Ivern Tristana. I think that's a very, very difficult duo to deal with in the game right now, but Jojo plays Trist better than any other mid laner, and it's not particularly close. He's super, super active and super aggressive on it in the early game. He's able to generate leads so consistently, and this is really what the Trist into Azir matchup should look like. He was up like 6k gold on Quid by the end of the game, which is actually insane. Like, it shouldn't even be possible, but it was 23-minute game, and he was up like 6k gold. Quid didn't even finish his mythic item. Like, it was miserable on the other side, which we will get to, but Jojo really is that dude this split. Whatever problems he was having in spring, whatever inconsistencies he was having, you know, in summer of last year as well, they're all gone now. He is back to being the Jojo that we all were promised. This is the best version of him that has ever existed, in my opinion, and I don't know if it's bringing in someone like Armeo, who's always been really good at making his mid laner look like $1,000,000. I don't know if it's bringing in a super solid bot lane in Unforgiven and Ayla that really don't need a lot of resources in order to win 2v2. Whatever it ends up being, even Revenge on the top side, who's very good in isolated 1v1s. Whatever it is, whatever the reason is, Jojo has just been able to be completely unlocked this split, and it's been really fun to watch. Hopefully he can keep it up. He's been prone to inconsistencies before, but he's been phenomenal over the beginning part of this split. Armeo was also awesome on the Ivern. Ivern's one of those picks that's super fun to watch, in my opinion, at the pro level, because it's all about pathing. It's all about macro knowledge. And so you can really see the players that are, you know, more experienced and comfortable on it than others, and I think Armeo definitely is someone who falls into that category. Completely out-jungled Closer. He was everywhere on the map, and Closer was nowhere to be seen. Really, really good stuff from the jungle mid duo of EG. Unforgiven and Ayla dominated the bot lane matchup. Both of them have been some of the best players in their roles in the league. Revenge was really solid on the Fiora on the top side going into some days Cassante. So just, again, EG winning across the board. That's how you get a 23-minute win. Really good stuff from them. And then for 100 Thieves, again, it's jungle mid diff. Like, this is kind of the story of their split up until this point. Jungle mid has been a problem for this team, and it will continue to be a problem, I presume. Dud of the game is going to go to Quid in the mid lane. He really has not adapted as well as we would have hoped. But I hate to say it, I was kind of right about his analysis going into the split. Talking about Quid, you know, watching his Challengers League tape, I was saying this is a really good player on a really bad team, and he's getting every single resource that this team has to offer. And I'm really worried that if he goes to a team where, you know, like 100 Thieves, where he's not going to be priority all the time, where he's going to have to allow his lane to kind of be, you know, weak side for a bit, or sacrifice a wave in order to make sure that jungle can do all the things, or move bot lane, or whatever they want to do, right? I don't know if he's going to be able to adapt to that as well, and that's kind of been the case. It's not just that. Obviously, I think his mechanics have struggled quite a bit. And that was his strength going into the split, which is definitely concerning, but he has not adapted to this team environment well at all, or the team, like the way that the team wants to play, and I think that's definitely going to be a problem moving forward. Closer has also just been really bad this split, and there really is no other way to say it. He was bad in spring, too. He had a really good end of the split. Like, the final week of the split, he was really good, and outside of that, he was not good for 100 Thieves over the course of spring split either. This is probably the worst year of his entire career up until this point, and that is definitely concerning. If these two continue to get gapped as much as they were in this game, like, that's a problem. But Doublelift and Bucio were not particularly good either. They just kind of lost to Unforgiven and Ayla. It wasn't entirely their fault, but just kind of the case. And Someday was just weak side Cassante top, and he played into Fiora. He didn't really do anything. And so for 100 Thieves, jungle mid's got to step up, or else this team is going to be, you know, a lot worse than I think a lot of people want them to be. They're not going to be in Worlds contention if that's the case. And then for Evil Geniuses, like, this is a Worlds contention kind of team. This is a team that absolutely has the ability to head to the World Championships this upcoming year, and I think a lot of it is off the back of their MVP, but it really is everybody. It's not just JoJo carrying a bunch of scrubs across the finish line, right? It's 5 really good players and then 1 phenomenal player, right? And that's just how it works. They're all some of the best players in their role right now, and that means EG is legitimately one of the best teams in North America. And then moving on to our final game of day number 2 here, and it was a little bit of a debut and certainly a good one, as we saw Team Liquid taking on Immortals And Team Liquid is going to be able to pick up the win here. Now, that normally wouldn't be as big of a deal, but like I said, in the previous day's overview, TL is making a change in the mid lane. Harry is out, and APA is in. Now, anybody who follows my NACL videos that I have on the channel here knows that I'm super big on APA. He's been by far, in my opinion, the best mid laner in the NACL all year long. And he was my favorite to win MVP in the summer split with how he had played up until this point. And now he's coming in and making a main roster debut. This honestly reminds me quite a bit of Eminus coming up for Cloud9. I'm not exactly sure if he's going to be Eminus, right? But it's a very similar situation of a player who is just simply dominating the NACL, too good for that division, and a team that really needs him on the main roster. And I think APA could really fill a similar void to what Eminus did for Cloud9, and he was phenomenal in game number 1. He's going to be my player of the game, although it was very contentious. You know, the storyline almost kind of won here because Summit was also really phenomenal in the top lane on this Rumble. Both of them were really, really good, and honestly, Summit was maybe a little bit more impactful in terms of what he was able to do on that champion, both in and out of lane. But how do I not give it to APA? The dude absolutely popped off on Tristana, and he looked really, really good doing it. This is the debut of your dreams, you know what I mean? Going against the worst team in the league and absolutely destroying them. This is everything you could have asked for, and I thought APA was really phenomenal. He's an aggressive player, but he knows when he needs to rein it in as well. He can just kind of do a little bit of everything. He can play these more aggressive, like Tristana, early game, hyper carry-oriented picks, or he can play control mages, or he can play roamers. He can really do a little bit of everything, and I think fans are really going to come to like APA very quickly. We've seen North American mids really succeed in the league at this point, and, you know, I really do think that APA is going to be the next among them. I really like him as a player, but like I said, Summit was also phenomenal in this game, just absolutely destroyed solo and lane on this Renekton, and that's a little bit of a problem for Immortals. You know, losing to a Rumble is actually very easy in the current meta. He does a ridiculous amount of damage, and look at IMT's team. They don't really have a lot of ways to deal with that champion, and so good for Summit. He very much would deserve player of the game in a regular scenario, but you know, APA also deserved player of the game, and so it could have gone to both. Pioshik was really good on the Nautilus, really interested to see him continuously pull this out. He's been pretty good on it, and obviously going into Kenvi isn't the hardest thing in the world, but he looked good on it here. Yan and Core were really good. Team Liquid just kind of obliterated the worst team in the league, and that's good. That's what they should be doing. That gives me faith that APA is in the exact situation that he needs to be in, that Summit's playing well, Pioshik's playing well, Yan and Core are playing well. If APA can step in and be a top half mid laner in the league, like this could, again, be one of the better teams in the LCS, and a team that absolutely contends to go to the World Championships, and that's really what Liquid's looking for. And then for Immortals on the other side, they're the worst team in the league. At this point, it's not even up for debate. This team cannot win a game to save their life. Everybody else in the league is competitive at some level. Like, even FlyQuest won 3 games last week. Nobody else has been as bad as Immortals has been over the past 3 weeks of the split, and it's really just frustrating to watch. Dud of the game is going to go to Solo, but you want to give it to Kenvi? Sure. You want to give it to Tactical? Sure. All of them were pretty bad in this game. Solo, I think, just got the most embarrassed in terms of losing to Summit, and then losing to APA, and then just constantly being in a bad position. It wasn't a very good game for him, and it really hasn't been that great of a split for him. He was okay for TSM. He really was. When that team was kind of rolling towards the middle part of last split, he was actually playing relatively well, and I had been relatively high on Solo. I thought he was definitely an LCS caliber starting top laner, and I don't know, obviously Immortals has a lot of problems, but he's been getting destroyed in lane this split, and that's definitely an issue. Kenvi, I'm just super out on at this point. Like, maybe he can go back to the NACL and get his confidence back, but he's clearly just mentally not there right now, and this Immortals team has utterly destroyed him. Tactical had a bad game. He's allowed to have a bad game after he has been the only player who's actually played well for them for so long. Treats continues to not really make any sort of impact on the game, and Balulu, very similar, even on his signature Zoe pick, and so for Immortals, just not a lot of positives. In fact, almost no positives to speak of over the last few weeks, and it's got to be pretty disappointing for a lot of the fans. But, you know, for Team Liquid, really, really nice win. Hopefully this team can keep this up. Hopefully APA can kind of stabilize that position. They're still really reliant on the top side of the map being able to win, but they've been in really good form recently. Both Summit and Pioshik, I think, have been playing relatively well, and so if Liquid can continue to be a fun team to watch that can take on some of the better teams in the league, I think the league is going to be better for it. And then jumping into our third and final day of action here in week 4 of the LCS, and we kicked off day number 3 with a matchup between Dignitas and FlyQuest. And Dignitas is able to pick up the big win here, FlyQuest, with another 0-3 week. That means 4 weeks of the season, 3 of those were 0-3s. The other one was a 3-0. So very weird stuff coming in from FlyQuest. It finally felt like they were starting to figure things out in week number 3, and then the wheels just continue to fall off for them. But congratulations to Dignitas. The gatekeepers of the middle of the standings continue to do their job here and prove that FlyQuest is not in the middle of the standings. They are towards the bottom of the standings at the current moment. Dignitas did play really well, and I do want to give them a lot of credit. Some of their players are playing some of the best League that they've played in a while. I say some of their players. I'm really talking about Jensen in the mid lane, who is going to get my player of the game here for Dig. This is the best he's looked all year, and it's really not all that close. There were definitely some moments in spring where it was like, okay, he's pretty good, and honestly, he was pretty good for this team. He was probably their best player by a pretty large margin, and there really wasn't a lot else positive to talk about for Dig. He's just not a carry-oriented guy. I was saying if you put more talent around him, he can still be Jensen. I didn't think all that differently of him last split than I did with the Cloud9 split in 2022, but I really do think that he's kind of unlocked a little bit more aggression and aggressiveness in the summer, which I think is a really big deal for this Dignitas team. Jensen really wasn't a player that they could consistently play through in spring, at least early on in games. They didn't really want to give him resources. They didn't really want to, like, gank his lane over and over and over again. That wasn't really the style that they wanted to play when it came to Dig. And, you know, Jensen, I think, is a player that has definitely never really been that kind of mid laner, but he's been a lot more of that this split, and he absolutely gapped Vikla in this game. Now, obviously, Vikla's having his own problems, but Jensen was really, really good in this, and I think it definitely deserves a shout. Obviously, pentakill on Jace is pretty darn good, only the second of his career, and so really cool to see that. Just kind of a weird year for Jensen overall, but definitely a positive player. Santorin looks so much better in the recent weeks. He's not been perfect. Like, I'm not going to try to pretend that he's been perfect, but he looks playable right now, which is certainly not how he's looked for most of 2023, in my opinion. So, good stuff from him. The Ivern, I think, has helped out a lot, and he played it well in this one. Tomo and Diamond playing a more safe, secure bot lane, something like the Ashe and the Braum. You know, it's kind of anti what Tomo and Diamond do well as players, but it's pro, I think, what Dignitas is looking for in terms of the comps that they want to end up building, and so I think that was a positive. And then, of course, Rich on the Rumble. I think Rumble's a pretty good pick right now. AP top laners, I think, are generally pretty strong, and it did really well into Impact's Renekton, who did not have a very good game. He was good on day 2, not as much on day number 3. So overall, good game from Dig, pretty much exactly what you're looking for, and you're hoping Jensen in particular can keep up this kind of form, because this was awesome from him. And then for FlyQuest on the other side, they're just a disaster. Like, what else do you want me to say? Vikla is done of the game. No shocker here. He has not been able to play at an LCS level all year long. And I'm going to spoil it here. Obviously, we'll bring it up in next week's video as well. But Vikla, as of the end of this week that we're talking about, has officially been benched. Spyrax is going to come in and play mid lane for this FlyQuest team. He's certainly been on a much hotter tear than he had been recently, but I'll talk about him next week. This really is just about Vikla getting benched and not being in a very good spot. I have no idea what's going on. I see a lot of people online talking about how, you know, he must just not care, he must have given up, and I don't know if I could disagree with that sentiment more from everything that we've seen and know about Vikla. The dude is grinding solo queue. The dude is grinding scrims. He's in there every day, 12 hours a day, really trying to get better. It's just not clicking. If you listen to anybody who has worked with this team or you know, is working with this team at the moment, Vikla has been the guy who has worked the hardest. And so this narrative that he has somehow given up or that his work ethic's not there or he came to NA for the bag, it's just not true. It's just not clicking, and that's okay. I still think he can be a really good player. Remember, this guy was Rookie of the Year in the LCK last year, and so, you know, Vikla can still be one of the best players in the league. I still believe that he's got the talent to do it, but the confidence has been absolutely shattered, and clearly there's something mental going on with him. If he can get that figured out, that's going to be super important for FlyQuest. I don't think it'll matter in 2023 because this probably is the end of Vikla's time in the LCS, and at least for, you know, this year, but hopefully he can figure it out moving forward, because I really do believe he can still be, you know, the best mid laner in the LCS, should he be able to figure everything out. It's just been about as disastrous of a summer as you could possibly get. Everybody else on this team was honestly kind of okay. Vikla just kind of ran it down. Impact was the other player that I thought was relatively bad, but Spica had a good game on the Viego, was pathing relatively well. Santorin does give over a lot of resources to the enemy jungle, even if he is able to get some for himself, so that's worth noting. And then Prince and Vulcan probably had one of their more cohesive games of the year. It just wasn't going to be enough. FlyQuest never really had enough pressure on the map to be able to win, and Jensen was the best player on the Rift, and so that's going to do it. But Dignitas was really, really good in this game, and hopefully they're going to be able to keep it up. Again, a 500 team, and I would expect them to hang around there, but, you know, just being a 500 team is so much better than what they were in spring that they've got to be excited about that. And then moving on to our second game of day number 3 here, and it's another little bit of an upset, a couple of these this week, as we had NRG taking on Evil Geniuses, and NRG is actually able to pick up the win here. Again, another surprising win for NRG. I guess that's just what this team is going to do from this point onwards. Like, I know CLG isn't in the league anymore, and Energy really has to uphold kind of the tradition and the reputation that CLG had, but this truly is a counter-logic team. I've seen people starting to coin them as not rational gaming. I think that's a very funny title considering the circumstances, and honestly, they've lived up to that. They've won 5 series, and almost all of them are the 5 best teams in the league, and then they've lost 7, and 7, they're to the worst teams in the league. It's very weird how this team ends up performing, but they end up playing a lot better against better teams, and it's kind of fun to watch. But congratulations to Energy. Really nice win here. Player of the game for me is going to go to Palafox in the mid lane. I've always really liked Palafox. It's hard for me not to like Palafox because I really just do believe that he is very good and has always been very good. Another player, both him and Dokla, I think Dokla gets a lot of, credit for the story that he has gone on, which is that, he had his time in the LCS. He wasn't, all that great. And then he went back down to, Challengers League, to Academy at the time, really rebuilt his mental, his confidence got better and caught back up and became one of the more interesting top laners in the league. And that's a great story. And it absolutely is the case, but someone like Palafox really lingered in Academy for a long time as well, whether it was on Optic or Cloud9 or, moving to FlyQuest and having that not work out and then finally getting on CLG. Like, there were so many different things that Palafox had to overcome as well to get to where he is, and he is also one of the best players in his position in the region, and so really good stuff from Palafox, a great LeBlanc game. He was everywhere on the map, and he deserves all the credit he's going to get for this game, going up against the likely MVP and just beating him, just being better than him, and he was better than JoJo in this game. FBI also, of course, deserves some notice and some mention here. He got a pentakill on the Jinx. That's 2 pentakills in 2 games. Pretty wild that ended up happening, but FBI, gapping Unforgiven, I think is really funny. EG fans are always like, oh, Unforgiven is way better. We upgraded so much, and, Unforgiven might be better. It isn't by a lot, though. Like, it's certainly not like a runaway, you definitely upgraded here no matter what kind of thing. FBI still is a really good player if you give him the resources, and he was really good this game. His positioning is solid, and, he really knows when he can play aggressive and when not to. A lot of AD carry really is mental. Like, as much as it is mechanics, as much as it is positioning, it's knowing when and where you can be at any particular time, and I think FBI does that at an incredibly high level. So it's good to see the 2 carries step up for Energy and Palafox and FBI. Ignar played really well. Contracts has been phenomenal this split, like in their wins. He was really good on the Sedge. This is starting to become kind of a signature pick in my mind. He's been really good on Sejuani basically his entire time on CLG and now on Energy. He's been really, really good on this pick. That's basically been meta for 3 straight years now, so good to see that from him. He gapped Armeo, like a lot. I said Ignar was good and then just kind of walked over him. He was the better support in this game. The Rel was actually super impactful and the Nautilus was not. A couple of really bad engages coming out from Ayla, which we'll talk about, but Dokla was also really good on the Renekton. This really just was a gap from Energy, and that's really good to see, but it's not good to see for Evil Geniuses. They had a chance to walk out of this week as the first team to hit 10 wins, but alas, they're now sitting at 9-3. Of course, again, I have to say this, I have to preface this. Best of ones, it's hard to know, like, whether or not EG is, like, good or not good, right? It's hard to know whether or not one loss to Energy means something, because how many of the best teams in the LPL and the LCK lose game 1 and then win game 2 and 3 super dominantly, and we never even talk about the fact that it was close? A lot. It happens more frequently than you would think, and so game, best of ones can be very volatile, and Evil Geniuses losing this is bad, but it does highlight some question marks about this team. I see a lot of people overreacting, saying, oh, Energy banned away the Jace and the Ahri, and they took the LeBlanc, all the prio picks, and Evil Geniuses was forced to play Azir, and they couldn't do it. And it's like, okay, well, that's not true. First of all, JoJo's played Azir multiple times already this split, and he's done well. And yes, the prio wasn't quite there, but, they've won without JoJo before. Like, JoJo's had, relatively mediocre games before. It's not all on him, as much as I think the narrative would like to say it. I've seen some people say, it turns out Armeo, Unforgiven, and Ayla weren't all that good because Energy focus-fired JoJo and nobody else could step up and win. I think that's such an oversimplification of what the problem is right now for Evil Geniuses, or what it was in this game. I think, honestly, they just underperformed. It really was just, they didn't play up to the level that they had been playing up to. Armeo's early game had usually been really good, but going into Contracts, who does have some very good early games, he just lost a little bit more cleanly than he had in previous games. Revenge didn't have quite as stable of a laning phase as he had typically had. Unforgiven and Ayla didn't have the pressure in that lane phase, and that one is kind of on them. Like, Xayah Nautilus absolutely should have the pressure into Jinx and Rel, but they didn't. Dud of the game is going to go to Ayla for me. A lot of those engages on Nautilus just felt forced and really not all that good, and I think that was an encapsulation of how this team ended up playing towards the back half of the game, is forced and not all that good. JoJo had to build Crown just to survive all the pressure that Energy was putting into them, and, the rest of the team just wasn't able to step up. It's going to happen every once in a while. I'm not going to say that everybody on Evil Geniuses is bad because of it. That is very much an overreaction in my opinion. But EG's still a good team, but, you know, dropping a best of one game, it's going to happen every once in a while. Hopefully this doesn't become a trend for them. And then for Energy on the other side, I don't know how to feel. They're 5-7, which is a pretty good record, but it's not a great record, right? And they're not sitting in a spot where I definitely feel like they're a top 6 team or anything like that. There definitely is still a lot of things that they need to prove to me, but there's a lot of talent on this team, and we know that. Contracts and Palafox are both really good. If FBI can get on board and have another game like he did here today, like more often, that's going to be huge. Dokla's going to have some great games, and Ignar's good enough to be able to win with, and I think Energy could be a top, 5-6 team, especially with everything else going on in the league. It's just been the lack of consistency that's really held them back, and they're really going to need it from a lot of the players that I think you kind of expected to get it from at the beginning of the year. And then moving on to our third game of day number 3 here, and it's maybe the best team in the league taking on maybe the worst team in the league, as we saw Immortals taking on Cloud9, and Cloud9 was able to get the job done with the win here. This was another not particularly close game. Honestly, quite a lot of these in the LCS this week. I'm not sure if that says anything about the league or anything like that, but some upsets happened as well. It just was a week of a lot of games where one team got a lead early and never really looked back, and I think that was kind of the case for Cloud9 here. They were definitely the better team here, and most of the advantages that they were able to generate was in that jungle matchup, and nobody is particularly surprised at that. You have Blabber going into Kenvi, which is just kind of a little bit of a mismatch. I'll just say that. A little bit of a mismatch on paper, and it really was well done by Cloud9. The top side of the map continues to be really good for them. The jungle mid duo in particular is just such a positive for Cloud9 over basically anybody else in the LCS. There really aren't a lot of teams that are going to be able to play through jungle mid quite the way that C9 is. But Blabber is a clear choice for player of the game. He really was phenomenal in this one. He's really good on these engage-oriented junglers. Like, I know people kind of look at him as more of a carry-oriented player, and he definitely can pull out carry picks. But when I think of Blabber, like, one of the first things that comes to mind is the Gragas. And I think Sejuani is kind of in a similar vein of what she can do, and I think it really plays towards Blabber's strengths of being able to generate that lead early and then spreading the wealth to the rest of his lanes. He absolutely did that here, most notably into the top lane with Fudge on this Renekton. Was just really consistent throughout the game, but Blabber was 100% KP, 6-1 and 13. Just a phenomenal game from him, and if he can keep that up, if he's going to be on MVP pace, like he pretty much always is in terms of the LCS, then this team is going to be just fine. A lot of the worries that I think were generated because of the loss earlier this week, I think are definitely not necessarily things they have to worry about for too long. But Fudge, like I said, was also really good for this team on the Renekton, was just dominating solo in lane. Solo had a miserable week for Immortals, but Fudge looked really good, and he's looked better, I think, as of recent. He wasn't as dominant at the beginning of the split as he was in spring. He was my runner-up MVP last split. Like, he really was that good. He was arguably the best player on Cloud9 throughout the regular season, and I think he absolutely deserved all the praise that he got. Obviously, had a little bit of a rough MSI and kind of gets some flack for maybe not being as internationally stable as some of the other players from North America, but he still is unbelievable domestically, like, at the very least. And I still think he's better internationally than people give him credit for, but Fudge was awesome here. It feels like he's finally getting back into his groove. And then Eminus, I already spoke on it this week, has been great. Berserker and Sven have honestly been a little bit lackluster over the course of the last few weeks. Berserker started out the year incredibly hot in weeks 1 and 2, but 3 and 4 have really not been the bot lane's like forte in terms of Cloud9. Now, obviously, that can change in an instant. These are two of the best players in their roles in the region. Berserker might be the single most talented player in North America, but it's really been a lot on the jungle mid duo to be able to get Cloud9 across the finish line this week in particular. So kind of an interesting development there, but this team is still really good. Not much else to say. And then for Immortals on the other side, they just suck. Like, I hate to say that. I really wish there was nuance to this discussion, but this is now the 10th loss in a row for Immortals. They started out the split 2-0 on the first 2 days, and ever since then have not won a single game, which is just absolutely brutal. It feels like the confidence of this team has been absolutely shattered. And honestly, none of them are playing all that well, with maybe the exception of Tactical, which is pretty crazy to say considering he's the most feast or famine player on the entire team, but top side of the map has been a disaster. Dead of the game is going to go to solo again on the Malphite. Just a miserable week for him. He consistently was not productive. His ultimates, whether it be on Malphite or on picks like Poppy earlier in the week, were not very good and not very productive. His laning really took a step back. He just had a really bad week, and it's going to happen every once in a while, but it's really not good for that to happen on a team like this. You need to be able to step up and prove that you're more than the rest of the team, because really at this point, they're playing to just kind of survive. Like, technically, no one's eliminated, but you got to be able to keep yourself in the race because there's only 2 weeks left to the season, and Solo, unfortunately, hasn't been able to do that. Kenvy's the worst jungler in the league. There really is no ambiguity about that at this point. He just has not been very good ever since he came up to the LCS. Again, maybe he can get better, but it's not right now. Balulu has been irrelevant this entire split. Treats has honestly been kind of bad ever since the first 2 games, and like I said, Tactical's doing a lot of damage. He's consistently putting himself in positions where, in a better circumstance, he could probably win some team fights, but it's just never going to happen on this Immortals team, and it's got to be very frustrating for him, but this team is just not very good. I don't really see a lot of avenues for them to be able to fix the problems that they have, and I expect them to continue to be kind of a negative. And then for Cloud9, they're good. They're still tied for first place with the Evil Geniuses loss earlier this day, I guess, than the game before this, and so they're still feeling pretty good. Obviously, not the cleanest of weeks losing to Golden Guardians, but still they were able to rebound and recapture a lot of the momentum they were able to generate up until this point, and that's really all you need to do here in the middle of the split. And then moving on to our 4th game of the final day here, and it's an interesting matchup between Team Liquid and 100 Thieves that Team Liquid is going to be able to take the win in. This is really good to see. Talked about APA coming in and really kind of revitalizing what Team Liquid was doing, reinvigorating a lot of their game plans, and that was the case again here in this second game with him in the mid lane. Not saying it's entirely on him, because obviously no one player is going to change the fortune of a team in the LCS that much, but APA coming in, I think, being aggressive, being decisive, willing to go and make a lot of plays and be more aggressive than at least what Harry was offering, I think has been very positive through the first 2 games. Very small sample size here for Team Liquid, and I think it's definitely something that we're probably going to see for a lot of the rest of the year if it continues on like this. He was far from the only player to play well, but certainly this team was looking good towards the back half of this week. My player of the game is going to go to Core JJ in the support position on that Thresh. People are kind of talking like Core has been dead and gone for a while, and I don't necessarily think that that's a fair assessment to give Core JJ in an instance like this. Like, I know he hasn't exactly been, like, peak Core JJ where it's like, oh my god, clear MVP, clear best player in the entire league, just way better than everybody else, and it's not particularly close. Like, he's not that. He's not guaranteed the best support in the region. I probably have him at number 2 or number 3 at this point, depending on where you think of Vulcan at the current moment, but you know, Core is still really, really good, and he has been very good all year long. He's really not been a negative for this team, even a little bit. Both him and Yawn, I think, have been pretty big positives early on in games for Team Liquid, and Yawn has been relatively efficient towards the back half. But when Core gets a playmaker like this, you put Yawn on like a Draven, and you let Busio get mind-controlled into going in over and over again, Core is going to look absolutely phenomenal. And this is the kind of performance you're looking for. He's still an all-pro caliber support. Like, I don't want to forget that Core JJ is on this team just because Summon and Pioshik do kind of run the narrative. Core is still really, really good, and he proved it again in this game, but APA was phenomenal on the Ziggs. Like I was talking about earlier this week, he's got a really deep champion pool. This is somebody who plays pretty much all kinds of champions. He can play artillery mages, he can play control mages, he can play melee mids, he can be aggressive, he can be passive, he can do whatever. He's just a very versatile player and a very, very good mid laner, and he showed that again here, going into Quid on the Akali playing the Ziggs. Really not something we're seeing all that much, and when we are seeing it, we're seeing it in the bot lane for the most part, but I actually think this was a really good matchup for him, and he executed on it incredibly well. I think APA is one of those players that we're going to be looking at by the end of the year as one of the biggest additions that any team made at any point throughout this year, and that's going to be a really big positive. Summit continued to be really good on the Rumble. He just had a really good couple of games on the Rumble this week, so might be interesting to see if they continue to go to that pick. Yawn was good on the Draven, even though he was donated a ton by Core JJ, and Pioshik was definitely the better jungler in this game, was significantly more active, and was definitely moving around the map and keeping things interesting. So Team Liquid looking good overall, and 100 Thieves, you know, they're who we think they are. Like, at this point, I don't want to say I'm giving up on 100 Thieves, because I certainly think that the LCS in particular is weak enough where they could be a Worlds team if something ends up clicking, but this team is not very good in its current iteration. I really don't have a lot of faith in them. I don't have faith in the jungle mid duo. I'm not going to say I'm completely giving up on them, but I'm pretty damn close to just giving up on Closer and Quid as a duo. Closer has been, you know, abysmal across this year. He went 0-2-1 on a facilitator like Sejuani. He's so passive. This is not Closer. Closer got in trouble a lot of times at the beginning of his LCS career, like on Golden Guardians, for being too aggressive and taking plays that he really shouldn't. Now it's the complete opposite. It feels like he's not really doing anything. Reminds me a ton of how I talked about Santorin in both this split and last split, where it's just like, do something, wake up, please. And then for Quid, I just don't know if he's, like, going to make it at this level. Like, I know it was a risk to bring him in, and obviously Challengers League is not a major region, and so you can't expect the quality to always be there, but Quid honestly just doesn't look like he's very good in lane. Like, it just doesn't look like he's a very good mid laner, which could be a little bit of a problem. I'm not going to completely give up on him, because again, he had really good moments in Challengers League. He was really, really interesting as a prospect, but the consistency wasn't there. And again, also, he was funneled resources so much on that Gen G Challengers team, because they just simply didn't have anybody else to play through. And so Quid now having to play in an environment where it's not just about him and he's going to get targeted a bit more, like, it's a problem, and it's been a problem, and I don't know if he's going to be able to ever become that consistent. I really have not liked the tape that I've seen from him. Again, I don't want to overreact, but the tape that he has shown over the last 6 games has been very bad. Like, not just regular bad, like very bad. Dead of the game for me, though, doesn't even go to either of those two. It's going to go to Busio in the support position, who just got super gapped by Core. Like I said before, it felt like he was mind-controlled to consistently try to go in as Kai'Sa into Draven, or as Kai'Sa Nautilus into Draven Thresh. And I just don't know what you're doing there. You just got to play safe. You just got to play a little bit more controlled, and Busio just didn't do that this game. It felt like he wanted to get it over with relatively quickly. Obviously, that's not the case, but just kind of a weird performance from him. He's not usually like this, but this was a pretty poor performance. Double lift wasn't particularly great, but what are you going to do when your support's running it, and someday was completely irrelevant in the top lane? They tried to make some dives onto Summit, but, you know, Equalizer really makes it difficult to dive a Rumble. So, overall, 100 Thieves not very good. Like, I really don't think this team is good, like, at all. I think they might be, like, a bottom 4 team in the LCS, and that's definitely disappointing, but I really just don't have a lot of confidence that this team is going to get better, if I'm being entirely honest. And then, for Liquid on the other side, they're good. They're actually good. I think it really is kind of a top 4 in the LCS right now, and Liquid does appear to be a part of that. There were definitely questions about whether or not that was the case heading into the week, but I think the back half of this week with APA and solidified for me that they, at the very least, deserve to be there right now. I think 5 downwards is so contentious, and there's almost no one that wants to step up and consistently be good, but Liquid, I think, has proven that they are a good team, and honestly, right now, should be one of the teams that is at least, at the very least, competing for a world spot in North America. And that brings us to our final game of the week here in week number 4 of the LCS, and it was a matchup between Golden Guardians and TSM. And TSM does it. They complete the 3-0 week number 4 with Insanity back in, and they looked really, really good doing so. They're honestly maybe like a real good team. We were kind of saying that before week number 3, and then obviously the wheels fell off in week number 3 with Ruby back in, but with Insanity now back in, like this team, remember, was number 5 in my power rankings with Insanity in before. Are they there again? Are they the 5th best team in the LCS at the current moment? I mean, they're kind of close at the very least. This team is surprisingly really, really good, and honestly, they're really fun to watch as well. They play a really fun style of league. Insanity and Wild Turtle absolutely do live up to their names. Insanity is insane, and Wild Turtle is wild, and they play very aggressive, and it very much works out for this team, and it's just a really good thing to see. When TSM's good, it's honestly kind of weird. I've never cheered for TSM. Like, I've always kind of been... you know, they're kind of boring, you know, as someone who's, you know, been watching and playing the game since 2012, you know, watching TSM, it's always like, it's the same team over and over again, but this might be the first time I've been like, TSM, I'm kind of intrigued with what you're doing at the current moment. So let's go ahead and talk about what happened in this game. Player of the game, it's going to go to Insanity on that Tristana. How many Tristanas got player of the game this week, by the way? Like, that champion is so overtuned. You cannot keep allowing her in almost any circumstance. It is so free if you leave her up, and that's just my opinion. But Insanity played her really well. If you're going to be aggressive, if you're going to try to generate early leads on that champion, she does a very good job of transitioning into the mid game and making it very difficult for the enemy team to actually try and skirmish around any objectives, because she just has so much combat power, especially when you pair her with a ton of CC, like the Maokai and like the Braum. I think this was a really good composition for TSM, and Insanity piloted it really well. You still have to go out and perform on the champion. Tristana's not like an uber broken pick in the sense like you just pick her and you win. You still have to actually play her right, and you have to be able to, you know, play her well, but Insanity, I think, did that at a very high level, and it was really, really good. Watching him rocket jump into 3 people on the enemy team and just absolutely destroy them, it's super fun, and really, he's a great player, and so... him being back in, I think, is just like a net positive for this team. The rest of the team is still playing well. Boogie had a very good week, one of his better ones, maybe his best one in the LCS as a whole, and he looked really good against a good Golden Guardians team here. Hanser was relatively fine on the top side, didn't necessarily get a ton of assistance, didn't necessarily need a ton of assistance. He was just generally fine. And then Wild Turtle and Chime were really good. Deathless Braum is pretty solid, and Chime, I think, is going to go underrated for his contributions this week, but he was really good in all 3 of their games. I really like Chime. I think he's one of those players that, you know, in 2 or 3 years, we could be talking talking about, maybe not even that long, like 1 year, we could be talking about as a top 3 support in the LCS if he gets put on a team that actually has the infrastructure to make him, look as good as he actually is. But, he's looking really good right now, and I really like him as a player. Wild Turtle is great for this team. He's been really, really fun to watch. He can be super aggressive, but you always kind of know what you're going to get out of him. He's not the most mechanically talented player in the entire league at this point, but he's definitely good enough, and, his ability to know where to be at all points in time and to play off of the rest of this team as well as he does, I think is a major positive. So TSM honestly just looking really, really good with Insanity back in. They look like a top 5-ish team in the league. And then for Golden Guardians, rough loss here. You probably didn't want to lose this one. I know TSM actually looks really good right now, but you were having a phenomenal week. You looked really good against two, very, very good teams, Cloud9 and FlyQuest, and so to drop the game to TSM, it's a little bit unfortunate, but again, I've said it 100 times this week, and I'll say it 100 times more in future weeks, I'm sure. It's a best of one. Like, anything can happen. You don't even have to be the better team to win a best of one. You really, really don't. But Golden Guardians definitely struggled with some things this game. I think Gory is going to get mic'd out of the game. He was just a little bit out-pressured by Insanity. As soon as that Tristana was able to generate that early lead, the Sylas became pretty much useless throughout the rest of the map. He was basically just a bot for Tristana to jump and get a reset on by the end of the game. The healing really didn't matter, and he wasn't really doing enough damage because look at TSM's comp. None of the targets are either in range of the Sylas in the Jinx's case, or stationary enough for it to be something that they can actually deal with. And so the Sylas became relatively useless. Stixxay and Huhi were not that relevant in the bot lane either. Always fun to see a Zac support pick. Like, that's pretty wild for Huhi to bring out. Definitely an intriguing thing. It didn't quite work here. I think this is something that could work if you moved into like future games, especially against worse competition. But Ashe Zac is a super interesting bot lane idea, and I could see where they were going with it. They just weren't able to outplay it in this instance. River was actually pretty good in the jungle. Certainly was creating on the Poppy, just not enough, and then Licorice was rather irrelevant in the top lane. But for Golden Guardians, they're basically the same team that we thought they were. This is a frustrating loss, but in the same way that Cloud9 losing on day 1 to Golden Guardians was also a frustrating loss. I'm not going to try to overreact to it. I think this team still is really, really good. They've proven over the course of this split that they have the ability to beat a bunch of teams. But what was I saying about Golden Guardians? This team needed to stay consistent. They needed to not drop games to teams that they should be beating, and unfortunately, TSM is one of the teams that they absolutely should be beating, and they dropped a game to them. And so, some of the worries are definitely still there with this team. They can be kind of streaky, but talent is absolutely there. And I'm not going to freak out over one random loss to TSM in week number 4. But for TSM, this is more of a big picture showing that, like, no, we're actually a good team, and people absolutely need to take us seriously now that we have our roster like this in and locked. And I think that's absolutely true. I think teams absolutely need to take TSM seriously. I'm not saying that they're definitely like a Worlds contending team, but if TSM made it to Worlds, would anybody really be all that surprised with how NA is performing right now? It's definitely something that's on the table, and they're really not all that far behind in the standings to make that a reality. All right, but that is going to do it for my LCS Week 4 overview and analysis of all 15 games across all 3 days. Up on the screen now, you're going to see the updated standings after 4 weeks of action. Any ties will just be broken alphabetically. Don't worry about bias here. In the first column to the right, you're going to see my updated power rankings. In the second column, you're going to see how those have changed from last week to this week. So let's go over the biggest risers and the biggest fallers. The biggest risers this week, I guess, we'll get to in a second. But top 4 is actually going to stay the exact same. I know that's maybe not how everybody's going to do it, but every one of them lost a game that they should have won this week, and all of them won games that were kind of contested this week. I feel pretty similarly about all these teams to what I felt last week. I still have C9 at number 1. That's going to be rather contentious. I still have Golden Guardians at 2. They did beat C9, but I would expect if that was a best of 5, it would go in the favor of Cloud9, just like it has at every other point this year. EUG is going to stay at 3. I still think they're the best of the rest, and Team Liquid looked great at the end of the week. If they continue to look as good as they did at the end of the week, they're going to rise from number 4, but they're going to stay there for now, just to make sure that, APA coming in and being as good as he was is not a fluke. But the rest of the group is definitely up for debate. Moving up 3 spots to number 5 is going to be TSM. They really do feel like the best of the rest right now with Insanity in. I think if this roster stays, they are going to be number 5. And hell, they could be even higher if they continue to play as well as they are right now. They're not as far out of the top 4 as, a lot of other teams would expect. Dignitas is going to jump up to number 6. They just deserve to be in the top 6 at this point. They've been relatively consistent, and honestly, I have more faith in them than I do in anybody in the bottom 4. And bottom 4, again, feels pretty locked to me. Number 7 is going to be 100 Thieves because they should be better than all the other teams around them. But again, I do not trust this jungle mid duo, and I really don't trust their consistency in general, and that was proven a lot this week. Energy comes in at number 8. They could potentially be higher than 100 Thieves. They had a better week, but I don't know if I trust them more. They're also just as inconsistent, and they still deserve to be down there, even though they played well. And then finally, FlyQuest is falling down to the bottom 2. They go down to number 9 in my power rankings. There's just no denying it anymore. There is no figuring it out for this team. They looked great last week, but that seems to be more of a fluke than any indication that this team actually is getting better. And so FlyQuest finally in the bottom 2, and the only reason they're not, bottom 1 is because Immortals is really bad. They've lost 10 games in a row, so obviously they're going to stay at number 10. But let me know who I'm overrating and underrating down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and feedback. Of course, we're not going to have the same opinions exactly, so I'd love to know you guys', of course, in a civil manner down in the comment section below. But it's time for my player of the week and my dud of the week. My player of the week in week number 4 is going to go to Insanity, the mid laner for TSM. How could it be anybody else? He honestly was really good this week. I did consider Boogie on the same team because I thought Boogie was actually really, really good in that same vein, but Insanity has been such a game changer, such a difference maker for TSM this entire split. To me, he was the most noticeably great player this week in week number 4. This entire week was about TSM in my eyes, and Insanity was the reason for that. So he's going to get my player of the week. And then my dud of the week, again, this was a 2-horse race, and really, I think this is going to upset some people that I'm not giving it to the player they want me to, but I'm going to go ahead and give it to Solo, the top laner for Immortals. He was, in my opinion, the worst player on the Rift this week by a gigantic margin. He was miserable in all 3 games that they played, and yes, I know, everybody's going to want me to give this to Vikla, and I'm not saying Vikla doesn't deserve it. He absolutely does deserve it. I just think Solo was just as bad. Actually, I think Solo was worse, which is why he's getting this award, but Vikla, narrative-wise, was probably worse, right? Like, it is worse that Vikla was as bad as he was than Solo, right? It's a little bit more shocking, but my dud of the week is going to go to Solo, and my player of the week is going to go to Insanity, but that is going to do it. I really do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, let me know down in the comment section below, and leave a like on the video. It really does mean a lot to me. Lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it helps get this video out to a lot more people. Of course, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. We're going to be posting a lot of content over the next week, but a little bit of a side for those LCS viewers, and for people who view my channel. Of course, I posted something on my community page a couple of days ago, about a week ago now, where I asked what I should do because I'm going out of town for a couple days. I will be away from my computer from the 14th to the 18th of this month, which means I won't be able to post videos, and I won't be able to kind of upload content, and I very likely won't be able to watch a lot of the games. And you guys voted in that poll, a lot of you voted, and you guys voted that that I should not condense the weekly recaps, not try to force them out, try to get 3 a day or whatever out that I would have to. Rather, I can just skip a week and kind of move on to the playoffs and really focus on a lot of the playoffs and the big parts of the regions, and then catch back up with the other regions after that. And that's going to be the case for LCS, so no week 5 actual analysis coming in for the LCS, which I know is a little bit frustrating, but that's going to be how it's going to have to be in terms of just the way that the schedule ended up working out. So we'll be back in week number 6 for the final week of the season to go over everything. So don't worry about that, but there will be no LCS video next week, just as a little disclaimer. But we post about every other region as well, all 4 of the other major regions, as well as the NACL. And if you want a comprehensive overview of LoL Esports, this is the place for it. So hit that subscribe button and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.